There are some people who see things before they're supposed to, who understand realities that most people don't grasp until much later in life, if they ever grasp them at all, who have their eyes forced open to truths that others remain comfortably blind to for decades. Maybe you saw through your parents' marriage when you were still a child. Maybe you recognized the flaws in systems and institutions while your peers still believed in them. Maybe you understood human nature's darker aspects before you had the emotional tools to process that understanding. You saw the truth too early, and that early vision came with a price. While other kids were playing, you were worrying. While your peers were trusting, you were questioning. While others were building their worldview on comfortable illusions, yours was already cracked and crumbling. People call it being wise beyond your years or an old soul. But those phrases don't capture the weight of it, the isolation, the burden, the psychological cost of carrying knowledge that you weren't developmentally ready for but couldn't unsee. Today, we're exploring what happens when you see the truth too early and why that premature awareness leaves marks that last a lifetime. When innocence is stolen, most people lose their innocence gradually. Life peels back the layers slowly, giving them time to adjust, to build coping mechanisms, to develop the psychological infrastructure to handle harsh realities. But for you, innocence was ripped away. Suddenly, completely, before you were ready. Maybe it was witnessing something you shouldn't have. Maybe it was being thrust into an adult role too young. Maybe it was trauma that shattered your assumptions about safety, trust, and how the world works. Maybe it was simply being perceptive enough to see what was really happening while everyone around you maintained their comforting delusions. Whatever the catalyst, you went from child to aware too fast. There was no transition period, no. Gradual adjustment, just a brutal awakening that changed everything. And while everyone else your age was still living in the simplified version of reality that childhood provides, you were already operating with the complex, often painful understanding that usually comes decades later, the loneliness of early knowledge. When you see the truth too early, you become isolated by your own awareness. You're surrounded by people who still believe things you already know aren't true, who trust systems you've already seen fail, who operate under assumptions you've already watched collapse. And you can't share what you see, because when a child tries to tell adults that the emperor has no clothes, they're dismissed, told they don't understand, accused of being disrespectful, negative, or difficult. So you learn to stay quiet, to keep your observations to yourself, to carry knowledge alone because no one else is ready to hear it. This creates a profound loneliness. Not just being alone, but being alone in your understanding. Seeing a reality that no one else acknowledges, living in a truth that everyone else treats as exaggeration or misunderstanding. You're surrounded by people, but fundamentally isolated by what you know. The weight of adult understanding in a child's mind. Your brain saw adult realities before it had developed adult coping mechanisms. You understood betrayal before you understood trust. You recognized dysfunction before you learned what functional looked like. You saw through illusions before you had a chance to believe in them. This is like forcing a computer to run advanced software on outdated hardware. The system works, but it struggles, it overheats, it crashes in ways it shouldn't. You carried adult-level awareness with a child's emotional regulation. You process complex, painful truths with an underdeveloped nervous system. You tried to make sense of things that adults struggle to make sense of. And that weight, that burden of premature understanding, damaged something, not in obvious ways, but in deep, foundational ways that affect how you function even now. Hypervigilance that never shuts off. When you saw the truth too early, you learned that the world isn't safe, that people aren't always trustworthy, that things can go wrong suddenly and completely. So you developed hypervigilance as a survival mechanism. You learned to scan for threats, to read micro-expressions, to prepare for worst-case scenarios, to never fully relax, because relaxing means being caught off guard. This hypervigilance protected you then, but now it's a prison. You can't turn it off. You're constantly scanning, analyzing, anticipating danger. Your nervous system never rests. Your mind never stops running threat assessments. Even in safe situations, you're braced for impact. Even with trustworthy people, you're watching for signs of betrayal. Even in good times, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. This isn't paranoia. It's the logical result of learning too early that stability is an illusion and safety is temporary. The inability to trust when you saw the truth too early, you learned that things aren't what they seem, that people lie, that systems fail, that promises get broken. And once you learn that lesson at a foundational level, trust becomes almost impossible. You meet someone kind, and instead of accepting their kindness, you wonder what they want. Someone offers help, and you question their motives. People make promises, and you automatically assume they'll break them. You're not being cynical by choice. You're being realistic based on what you've learned. You saw behind the curtain too early, and now you can never fully believe in the performance. This makes relationships exhausting because you can't trust easily, and people who haven't seen what you've seen don't understand why. They think you're damaged or difficult. They don't realize you're just operating from a different baseline of reality, the burden of perpetual disappointment. When you see the truth early, you also see potential outcomes before others do. You recognize patterns. You predict where things are heading. You understand the gap between what people say and what they'll actually do. This means you're rarely surprised when things go wrong, but it also means you're rarely able to hope without simultaneously seeing how that hope will likely be disappointed. You watch people make choices you know will hurt them. You see relationships heading toward predictable failures. You observe systems perpetuating the same dysfunctions you recognized years ago, and you can't even enjoy the satisfaction of being right, because being right about painful things doesn't feel like winning. It feels like carrying the burden of foresight that no one wanted or believed. You're trapped in a cycle of seeing, predicting, being proven right, and gaining nothing from it except the reinforcement of your early understanding that the truth is rarely comfortable and hope is often naive. Out of sync with your peers, while your peers were having age-appropriate concerns, you were wrestling with existential ones. While they worried about fitting in, you worried about survival. While they believed in straightforward narratives, you saw complexity and contradiction everywhere. This created a fundamental disconnect. You couldn't relate to their concerns because yours were so different, and they couldn't relate to yours because they hadn't experienced what you had. So you learned to perform, to pretend you cared about the same things they did, to hide your deeper concerns because expressing them made you weird, too intense, too much. You became fluent in two languages, the surface-level language everyone spoke, and the deeper language of truth that you spoke only to yourself. This performance is exhausting, and it creates a strange kind of loneliness, being surrounded by people while hiding the parts of yourself that actually matter. The accusation of being negative. When you see the truth too early, people accuse you of being negative, pessimistic, a downer, too serious, unable to just relax and enjoy life. But you're not negative, you're realistic. You're not pessimistic, you're pattern aware, you're not trying to ruin the mood. You're just unable to pretend you don't see what you see. The world calls it negativity when you refuse to participate in collective delusion. When you point out that the emperor has no clothes, when you can't muster enthusiasm for things built on foundations you know are unstable. So you're painted as the problem, the killjoy, the one who can't just go with the flow. And this label becomes another burden. Not only do you see difficult truths, but you're also blamed for seeing them. Finding connection, nearly impossible deep connection, requires being seen. But being seen requires revealing what you truly think and feel. And revealing what you truly think and feel often makes people uncomfortable. So you have a choice: be authentic and risk rejection, or be acceptable and remain unseen. Most people who saw the truth too early choose the latter. They learn to keep their real thoughts private, to only reveal the acceptable versions of themselves, to maintain surface-level connections, because deep ones require a level of honesty that most people can't handle. This means you go through life surrounded by people who think they know you but actually don't, who like the version of you that you perform, but would be uncomfortable with the real you. And the real you, the one who sees clearly, thinks deeply, questions constantly, remains hidden, known only to yourself. And the isolation of that is profound. Overthinking as a permanent state. When you saw the truth too early, your brain learned that surface appearances are deceptive, that you need to dig deeper, look harder, question everything. So your mind became a machine that never stops analyzing. Every interaction gets dissected. Every situation gets examined from multiple angles. Every statement gets parsed for hidden meanings. This isn't a choice. It's how your brain learned to operate. Because once you learned that reality isn't what it seems, your mind determined that it needs to constantly investigate to find what's really happening. The result is mental exhaustion. Your brain never rests, never takes anything at face value, never stops questioning, analyzing, processing. Other people can enjoy moments without simultaneously analyzing them. You can't. And this constant cognitive load is draining in ways that are difficult to explain to people whose minds don't work this way. The paralysis of too much awareness, ignorance allows for action. When you don't see all the complexity, all the potential problems, all the ways things could go wrong, it's easier to make decisions and move forward. But you see all of it. Every decision is complicated by awareness of consequences. Every action is weighted with understanding of implications. Every choice is burdened by knowledge of outcomes. This creates paralysis, not because you're indecisive by nature, but because you're too aware. You see too much to act with the confidence that comes from not knowing. While others leap into action, you're still processing. While they move forward with conviction, you're stuck in analysis. Not because you're incapable, but because you're carrying a level of awareness that makes simple action feel irresponsible. The inability to enjoy simple pleasures. When you saw the truth too early, you lost the ability to be fully present in simple joy, because your mind is always working, always aware, always seeing beneath the surface. Someone tells a joke and you're analyzing what it reveals about them. You're at a party and you're noticing the social dynamics, the performance, the underlying tensions. You're supposed to be relaxing and you're observing how relaxation is itself a kind of performance. This doesn't make you superior. It makes you exhausted because you can't turn your brain off and just be. You can't lose yourself in the moment because you're too busy seeing through the moment simple pleasures that others enjoy, light entertainment, casual conversation, uncomplicated fun. These things don't work for you anymore because your mind goes too deep, sees too much, questions too thoroughly. Who would you have been? One of the most painful aspects of seeing the truth too early is wondering who you would have been if you hadn't. Would you be lighter, happier, more trusting, more carefree? Would you have different dreams, different relationships, a different life? You carry a ghost version of yourself, the person you might have been if innocence had lasted longer, if awareness had come gently, if truth had arrived when you were ready for it. And sometimes you grieve that person, the one who could trust easily, who could believe in simple narratives, who could move through the world without the weight of premature understanding. You'll never know who that person was. Because the you that exists is the you that saw too much too soon. And that early seeing shaped everything that came after. The feeling of being fundamentally different, seeing the truth too early, creates a sense of being fundamentally different from other people. Not in a superior way, in an alien way. You don't fit, you don't think like others think, you don't feel what others feel, you don't understand how they can be so trusting, so optimistic, so unburdened. This difference isn't something you can explain. It's not about intelligence or experience. It's about a fundamental shift in how you perceive reality that happened too early and changed the entire trajectory of your psychological development. You're not broken, but you're also not quite the same species as people who got to keep their innocence longer. And that difference is isolating in a way that's difficult to articulate. The question of whether it was worth it sometimes you wonder, was seeing the truth early worth the cost? You gained awareness, yes. You understand things others don't. You can see through illusions that trap other people. You have depth and insight that came from your early awakening. but you also lost so much. Ease, trust, the ability to hope without simultaneous awareness of potential disappointment, the capacity for simple joy. Years of your life that should have been lighter but were heavy with understanding. Was the trade worth it? You'll never know. Because you didn't choose it. It happened to you. And now you live with the consequences, the gifts and the costs, without ever having had the option to decline. Accepting what cannot be changed, you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what you know. The truth that arrived too early is permanently integrated into who you are. Fighting this, wishing you could be different, trying to force yourself to trust more easily, attempting to reclaim innocence, only creates suffering. The path forward isn't about going back. It's about accepting what is. You saw the truth early, that changed you, and that change is permanent. This acceptance isn't resignation. It's acknowledging reality. Yes, it cost you. Yes, it made life harder. Yes, you carry burdens others don't carry. But it also made you who you are, and who you are, complex, aware, deep, insightful, has value, even if the world doesn't always recognize it. Transforming burden into wisdom. The early seeing that felt like a curse can become wisdom if you let it. You understand things others are just beginning to learn. You recognize patterns that others haven't noticed. You have insights that come from direct experience of truths most people avoid. This wisdom can serve you. It can guide your decisions. It can help you navigate complexity. It can allow you to help others who are just beginning to see what you saw years ago. The burden doesn't disappear, but it can have purpose. Your early seeing prepared you for something, maybe to help others, maybe to create something meaningful, maybe simply to live with more authenticity than would have been possible otherwise. Finding your people. You're not the only one who saw the truth too early. There are others who carry the same burden, who understand the same loneliness, who speak the same language of premature awareness. These people are rare, but when you find them, the connection is profound, because finally you don't have to explain, you don't have to perform. You can be your real self, complex, aware, burdened, wise, and be accepted for it. Seek these connections. Build relationships with people who can handle your depth because they have their own. Create community with others who saw too much too soon and are learning to live with what they know. These relationships won't erase the cost of early seeing, but they'll make the burden lighter because it's shared. Building a life that honors your awareness. You can't live the simple life you might have had if you'd stayed innocent longer, but you can build a life that works for who you actually are. Choose work that requires depth rather than shallowness. Pursue relationships that value authenticity over performance. Create spaces that allow you to be your full, complex self rather than forcing you to simplify. Stop trying to fit into templates designed for people with different experiences. Stop measuring yourself against standards set by people who didn't see what you saw. Instead, design a life around your actual needs. Honor your need for solitude, respect your inability to trust easily, accept your tendency toward deep analysis, work with your nature rather than against it. You paid a price for seeing the truth early. The least you can do is build a life that makes that price feel worth it. The psychological cost of seeing the truth too early is real. It's heavy, it's lasting, and it's rarely understood by people who didn't pay that price themselves. You lost innocence before. You were ready to lose it. You gained awareness before you had the tools to handle it. You saw realities that should have been introduced gradually but arrived all at once. And that early seeing changed you fundamentally, made you more guarded, more aware, more burdened, more isolated. But it also made you more real, more authentic, more capable of handling complexity, more resistant to illusions that trap others. You carry scars from seeing the truth too early, but you also carry wisdom, depth, understanding that most people won't acquire until much later, if ever. Yes, it cost you. Yes, it was unfair. Yes, you would have chosen differently if you'd had a choice, but you didn't have a choice. The truth arrived early. You saw it, and you survived it. Now, the question isn't whether it was fair. The question is, what will you do with what you know? Will you let the burden crush you? Or will you transform it into wisdom? Will you hide your awareness to fit in? Or will you honor it by living authentically? Will you resent what you see? Or will you use it to navigate a world that desperately needs people who can see clearly? The cost was high, but you already paid it. Now it's time to claim the wisdom that came with the price. Thank you for watching Motivation Thrones. If you saw the truth too early and carry the weight of that early knowing, you're not alone. Share this with someone who understands the burden of premature awareness. And remember, what cost you your innocence gave you your wisdom, and that wisdom, painful as it is sacred.